Hey everybody, welcome back to another Ishan S Show Daily. Today we're going to be talking about the fundraising numbers that we've been getting in from all the campaigns. Specifically, we're going to start off with President Joe Biden and his fundraising numbers in the last quarter. So that would be between October, November, and December of last year. And we're going to talk about what the significance of this money is and how exactly it serves a purpose. So before we get into that, I want to take a moment to just explain the importance of money in politics. So in politics, you really need money to be able to succeed. And the more money you spend is generally an indication of how active you are. And the money you are spending is typically on things like ads, campaign literature that you are giving to people at doors, hiring people to knock on doors for you to give that campaign literature. You're spending it on things like billboards. You're spending it on databases that give you access to so much information about voters, whose doors to knock on, whose doors not to knock on, which types of people you want to reach out to. And it provides other services that help manage a large campaign. The more money you have, the larger an operation you're able to run. It's why we were talking about in the run-up to the Iowa caucuses, we were talking about how Ron DeSantis spent every single dollar he had, not literally, but very close to it, in Iowa. He was spending a lot of money in Iowa to get people to turn out to vote. And what I meant by saying that was that Ron DeSantis was spending tons of money on a ground operation that was getting people, building a network, trying to get those get out the vote efforts, getting people to work around on that campaign. It takes a lot of money to be able to run a successful campaign. And Nikki Haley is running a really big one in New Hampshire. They're running millions and millions of dollars worth of ads, her campaign, but also Donald Trump's campaign. And those ad slots are not cheap. They are very expensive and they come at huge costs. So the more money you have, the better you have the ability to build a large operation. And the larger your operation, the more voters you are able to reach. And that's important because as you go up the chain of command, you are reaching out to more voters who are reaching out to a larger scope. And so there's more money being dealt with. And in presidential politics, you deal with a lot of it. Like in 2020, each campaign was spending $1 billion towards the end of it. So there's a lot of money that gets thrown around in politics, and it's a huge business. And so over this last quarter that we had, which was October, November, and December of last year, I want to talk about Joe Biden and his campaign and how they were able to raise $97 million. I know it says $117 million, but what that just means is that they have $117 million in their bank account right now, which is like, okay, only $117 million. No, it's a lot of money, and it shows. So they announced a campaign, President Biden's campaign announced that for his reelection effort, they were able to raise $97 million over 3 months. And if I'm not wrong, that is actually one of the largest amounts that he's been able to raise to date as a candidate for a reelection. And that's what they're saying, because it's his strongest fundraising quarter yet, and it's going to give him an advantage over his Republican rivals. So we're not getting their information yet. We have not gotten access to the Republicans. That would be Donald Trump, Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis. We have not gotten access to their campaign expenditures and spending figures yet, and how much money they've been able to raise, fundraising totals. That will be made available in the next few days. I think by the end of this week is what they're looking at. So why does it matter that he has raised $117 million? Well, if we look at Joe Biden traditionally has not been a very popular candidate lately, and it's because of a few reasons. We have the economy, inflation. It's high still, and admittedly it is going down, but it is still coming at the cost of a lot of households, and it's a burden for a lot of people, and inflation is frustrating some people. Then we have the foreign conflicts. If you are on one side, you are not liking what's going on in Ukraine and how much money we're giving to them. On the other side, what's happening in the Middle East, you may not be very satisfied with our involvement there. Joe Biden is the face of all of these things in America, and those are his policy goals. And whether you like it or not, those are the goals that he's been pursuing, and it's generally correlated with lower approval ratings in general for the president. However, and I'll pull up the approval ratings right now. This is 538 and their aggregation of Joe Biden's general approval ratings, and it shows just how approved or disapproved he is. And currently, he is disapproved by a margin of 17.6%, which is a very large amount. And I think recently he hit his lowest approval rating score in a long, long time. And this average is this average is like mind blowing, just because I don't think we saw it'd be this bad even under Donald Trump. And that says something, because we're coming back from a time when Joe Biden was approved generally 55%, 54%, 56%, I remember at times when actual polls that came out, all the way through August. And then the Afghanistan debacle happened, and that's when it became history. So in general, Joe Biden has been an unpopular president, but in recent months, that unpopularity has taken a significantly larger toll because of the current events and global events that have been happening around us that one could argue Biden had no control over. But there's chaos and there's not a lot getting done in Washington. And that could be his fault if you want to think of it that way. I mean, some will think it's not, and that's for you to conclude. But the point I'm trying to make is, despite Biden doing this poorly, like the fact that he's at his lowest point of his entire presidency right now, that he was able to raise $97 million, which is his best performance yet. It just goes to show just that Joe Biden has a strong base going into the 2024 election. Admittedly, it is not as large as what Trump raised when he was at this point in his term. He raised $154 million and they had $195 million cash on hand. Trump was actually using a lot more outlets. He had bigger groups backing him. He had different committees that were raising money. So because of that, he was able to garner more money and more support. But if we compare it to Biden's Democrat predecessor, Barack Obama, the administration he served in, at this point in Obama's term, for the third quarter of 2011, so going into the election year, he only raised $68 million and he had $81 million cash on hand. Compare that to Joe Biden's $97 million raised and $117 million cash on hand. This is, I believe, just adjusted for that for inflation. So this is real values that we have that we're talking about. And that's mind-blowing that Joe Biden, despite all that's happening, there are talks within the Democratic Party, not as a minority, it is a minority, but not a tiny minority, but a significant minority of people don't even want Joe Biden to be running as the Democrat. Yet, despite all of that, Joe Biden is able to raise this much money. Despite his low approval ratings, he is able to raise this much money. And I think it comes from 926,000 different donations of small dollar donors, and it comes from 500,000 unique donors. And I think I was watching something that said that he raised about $2 million right off the bat after the Iowa caucuses, after Trump won. And it goes to show that going into this 2024 election, for all of the struggles that Joe Biden has, he is pretty strong as a candidate. Despite everything, he does have some struggles that he is dealing with. But despite all of it, what I am seeing right now with the numbers that we are getting from the money, as well as in general, the type of results we're getting out of the Iowa caucuses, and we talked about it in terms of how much support Trump has within his own Republican Party, and the number of people that said they wouldn't back Trump. Joe Biden has a lot of money, and he has a key support base. And I think that's good to know. If I was working on the Biden campaign, what I would want to know is whether or not I have a firm support base. And I could get that from a poll that could tell me 30% of America backs me. But if I have nothing to show for it, it doesn't matter. This $97 million haul shows that there is that support out there. And Joe Biden can effectively spend his money. He's been a little more frugal with his money in the last quarter, but I think as we enter into the election year, more spending is going to happen, more donations are going to happen. And I'm fairly certain by the end of this quarter, I have this feeling that Trump is going to pick his vice presidential candidate, which is going to increase the likelihood of Democrats donating to Joe Biden, just because those types of seismic events result in more donations coming in. And I also think that other headlines in the news, such as Trump's legal issues, as well as him winning the nomination, presumably, are going to also bring in a lot of small dollar donors. I have my own reservations about how Biden is running his campaign. Just as a political observer, I don't think he's communicating really well. I think he can do a much better job with communicating. But again, with this, influx of money, I think that's achievable. That is something that can be done. But Joe Biden is entering into this election year in a arguably better position than Barack Obama was when he was entering re-election. When Barack Obama was entering his re-election campaign, it was coming off the cusp of a terrible midterm. It was awful. It was brutal. And he was also not positively approved. He was disapproved by the country. He had a few legislative losses. And he also had a few other issues going on. That on top of the money that was being spent on his campaign, that was being donated. Joe Biden is in a different position, and I would argue that he's in a better off position, just politically speaking, even if he has two wars that he's dealing with and the inflation that's happening. Again, I think the way he's been handling it, it can go away by November. It's just his job to be able to convey that, and that's where he's failing, but it's something that he can fix. Has time to fix it. I think if he is able to do that, he can prioritize issues like abortion. He can prioritize issues such as democracy. The moment that this becomes a Trump versus Biden campaign, because officially it's still not, it's a Trump versus Haley versus DeSantis campaign, but the moment it becomes a Trump versus Biden campaign, that's when all, the gloves come off and people are spending money like crazy. And that's where we'll start to get the billion dollars being spent. Now, Joe Biden's campaign manager is saying that it's a clear message that there's a coalition that knows what's at stakes at the election. Obviously, it's her job to say that this is good, and I will back her up on this one. I will say that the fundraising totals that we've gotten from Joe Biden show that he is entering into this election year stronger than what we might have thought, and he has more resources to be able to achieve, especially in the swing states like Michigan, in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, in Arizona, where polling is showing that he is struggling right now statistically. He can actually go in, he can utilize the right funds to be able to spend that in the right spots and fix and try to mitigate this issue. I think this would take a few months. It's a project to be able to fix these problems. But if he does it right, with the right amount of money, he can do it. He can turn things around. And I think this election could arguably be, right now it leans Trump, but I think arguably there's a good chance that this is going to become a dead toss-up or even a Biden election. But we still have 10 more months until the election. So we have plenty of time to keep our eye on all this type of stuff. We'll have a few more campaign disclosures coming in. We'll keep an eye on the money. We're going to see where things flow, and we'll see how things turn out. But yeah, that's what we have for today's Ishan S Show Daily. Comment below what you think of Joe Biden's fundraising haul. Do you think it's enough? Do you think it's not? Do you think he should be getting this money? Let me know everything. I read your comments, and it's an interesting experience reading it all, but definitely fun to read them all. So yes, that's what we have for today. Don't forget to subscribe to the political news blog on the IshanSshow.com. Follow us on social media. Subscribe to this channel. Keep following us on wherever you follow us, and we'll see you for the next video. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.